So what are we doing today? Today we are talking about persistence. We're introducing persistence with user defaults. What is persistence again? Persistence is saving data, saving the user's data to, in our example today, saving that user data to the device, to the simulator, to the iPad, to the Apple Watch, whatever it is, whatever that device is, you're saving that data to that device. We're introducing persistence with user defaults. This is the most basic persistence you could use as an iOS developer. User defaults is very closely related to anything that's settings in an application, right? So I have an app. For example, if it's a weather app, my weather app will allow me to change my zip code or my location. I go inside my settings, I change my zip code to, example, 10023. So it will find the weather for that zip code, right? When I kill the app, I come back, I relaunch the app, I should see weather related with that particular zip code, right? So that's ideal for user defaults. I have a zip code, I persist that zip code in different launches of the app. In different launches of the app, I will still have 10023 as my default, right? I go to California, I change it to 90210. It should still persist as 90210, right? So that zip code there persists. That's an ideal reason, an ideal case for using user defaults. So if there's a settings feature in your application, it could be a background theme, right? Before we had dark mode in iOS, for example, if you wanted some dark theme in your application, which you could still do, there's no reason why to not have a different theme if you want. There's apps with multiple colors. If you want to save that color or persist that color to your application, user defaults is an ideal candidate for that. The user goes to settings, they say they want an orange background, they click on the orange icon. When they come back to the app, it better be orange, right? Because the user will be very unhappy about that. Because they said, I want my app to be orange, you come back, it's not orange, right? In order to achieve that, you use user defaults. User defaults is at its heart a dictionary. Keep that in mind. User defaults is a dictionary. So the same syntax we use for a dictionary, we use for user defaults. In a dictionary, you access the value, in our example here, with optional binding, right? If let some value exists, some variable name equal to my dictionary, some key, right? That same syntax we use with user defaults. So user defaults is not this abstract type that's not anything to do with what you've seen before. You've seen dictionaries before since Unit 1. User defaults is very similar, right? There could be a value or it could be nil. If the user never set a default zip code, for example, the value will be nil for that particular key, right? But if the user did set a zip code, for example, there will be a value. And now you're inside your if-let block, and you could go ahead and use that zip code, right? So the same if-let binding that we've used, we'll use for user defaults to access if that user defaults, if there is a value for that particular key. Let's see what Apple says about user defaults here. Right? So Apple gives us some examples here. Apple says, for example, good use cases for user defaults. You can allow users to specify their preferred units of measurement, right? Or the playback speed of some podcast or some video, whatever you're doing. Those are ideal candidates, again, for user defaults. Let's slug that out. Okay, so let's select this out here. So keep in mind, user defaults, the best use cases for it is very closely related to user settings. User defaults equal to user settings. The unit of measurement. If I prefer miles, in the application, it has an option to change to miles or to kilometers, right? Simple data sets, settings, user defaults, right? So 1, it's a dictionary. 2, simple data types. Okay, let's go back to the lesson here. So valid values you could store in user defaults. You could store anything as far as like iOS data types, a string, a Boolean, a URL. Those are known as property list, and those are valid types you could store in user defaults, right? A string, a number, a date, an array. If it's an array, anything inside that array needs to be a valid property list. So I could have an array of strings, that's great. I could have an array of Boolean values. I could have a dictionary, but anything inside the dictionary itself needs to be of a Swift type that's compatible with a property list. Okay, let's start seeing how to use user defaults. I'll actually leave that lesson here if you want to test it out, but I think it will be better demoed in an app. So let's create an app to see how we could persist data in user defaults, okay? But the syntax, again, as I said, is very similar to a dictionary. Here, to store a value, for example, if we want to store a dictionary here, let me zoom in here. If I want to store some sort of string, I have a string, it's called hello world. I want to store it in user defaults. I want to save it. The syntax is user defaults, that's standard. In that case, we have some constant here. Instead of saying user defaults, that's standard every time, we have a constant called defaults. And the thing you want to save, all you have to say is set this value for some string. We access it via a string, a key. The key is a string, right? So here we say we want to set this string value, hello world. We want to save the string hello world. So to save it, to store it, to persist it, we say set, that's set. Set this string for some key. And that key, the way you will access it with that key is over here. How do you retrieve it? How do I get back that value? I get back that value, as I said before, very similar to a dictionary. If I want to see if a value exists in the dictionary, what do I use? I use optional binding, correct? Yes? So here I'm saying if let some variable, some constant here, I call it a string, defaults, I'm looking for a value for key, or object for key, right? Object for key. The key I'm looking for, or the value I'm looking for, is using this key. The key is called string key. Yes, sir?
Are those two methods interchangeable, value and object?
Yes. I tend to use object more. Yeah. So here I have object for key, and Cameron's question was, is those two, that value and that object, is it interchangeable? Yes. Very similar to like set value and add value on our HTTP method there. Also important, what type am I expecting? Here I'm using typecasting because if I do not explicitly say as question mark string, it will be of type any optional. Everybody? I need to specify what type of data I'm expecting here. If I do not typecast it to the type of data, it will be any. Okay? It will be any. So if I put in a string, I expect to take back out a string. If I put in a Boolean, I expect to take out a Boolean. If I do not specify, it will be any. Okay? Same with an array. If I put an array of person, I expect back an array of person. If I put in an array of string here, I expect back an array of string. Same as a dictionary. Whatever you're expecting back, similar to all typecasting we've done, You have a view controller, you want to go to some podcast detail view controller, you typecast it to podcast detail controller. Okay, so as I said, this will be better demoed. So let's go ahead and create an app and try to, or not try, let's create an app and persist data to user defaults. The objective of the app will be, we'll create some table view controller, which we haven't seen yet. I like to show stuff we haven't seen when I introduce new topics too, so that we see something else that we haven't seen yet. Yes, sir?
Can you go over property list again?
Oh, the property list? So, where am I here? So here we say a property list is a representation of an object that can be stored. Basically, that object needs to be able to be converted, right, to an archivable type in Swift, in iOS. It needs to be converted, very similar to some object needs to conform to codable in order for us to work with it. It needs to be a property list. And all the simple types we have in Swift is a property list. And as we will see on Friday, on Thursday, we could make our types a property list by conforming to codable. So we'll see more of that on Thursday. That'll be more apparent on Thursday. Okay? Cool. All right, so let's go create a new application somewhere. So let's go to Xcode and create a new application. We'll call it UserDefaults, so we know how to find it again later when we need help with that. Whoa. Okay, so UserDefaults demo. No core data, no unit test, no UI test for now. Its language is Swift, storyboard. Good. So click next. Create. And okay, so we have our basic application, basic project open. Let's navigate over to our storyboard. We navigate over to our storyboard. And what we'll be creating is we'll use a table view controller. Has anybody used a table view controller yet? Okay, so if a table view controller is very similar to, let me take up my phone here, so that's what that looks like. So if you want to create some app that looks like this settings screen here, if you want to create an app that's very similar to the settings screen in our iOS app on iPhone, this would be a table view controller. A table view controller allows you to create static cells. So far, we've done dynamic cells, a lot of dynamic cells, right? You have 100 photos, you have a table view, it lists 100 photos for you in some list in the rows, right? But here, if you have static cells, those are static cells. They're not gonna change. If I open up my app again, I won't have multiple general cells, for example. So static does not change. An ideal candidate for that UI would be a table view controller, right? In our object library, we have access to a table view controller. So we'll drag in a table view controller, we'll change its type from dynamic cells to static cells. And then we could add UI here as we need, right? So we'll introduce table view controller and see what that looks like. So if you want to create some settings app, where you want to go is get a table view controller. That'll make your life way easier than trying to do it in a table view, in a regular table view. Okay? All right. So this is our aim. We won't do so many cells. We'll just introduce very simple. We might have 2 cells here or 1 cell showing some data that the user could change. And when the user kills the application, they come back, that data should still be there. Yes, sir?
Is it more performance intensive if it's static cells? Or?
No, it's just different. Like if, for example, here I don't want to show 100 books. I just want the user to be accessing maps, which always exist. The user could access general, which always exists. So it's a static cell, does not change, right? And then there's grouping there. You see like the grouping, you could change the grouping as well. It's faster to set up and easier to maintain. as opposed to doing everything in code or having some sort of table view for a view controller. All right, let's see what that looks like. So let's go to our storyboard, click on the object library, and type in table view. All right? So today we're going to actually finish all the table view stuff. So we've seen table view cells, we've seen table view. Today we'll see table view controller. So at this point we'll be exposed to everything table view-ish. So get a table view controller, drag it in, right next to our view controller here. Cool. All right. So our first view controller, let's put a settings button on it. So get a button, a UI button, and we'll just center it here. And we'll name it settings. And for the constraints for settings, it will be horizontally centered and vertically centered. So go to your align constraints here. And for our settings button, horizontally and vertically centered. That's it. Okay. So our app launches, we see a settings button. We click on the settings button and we'll navigate over to our table view controller. So let's embed our first view controller in a nav controller. So click on your first view controller and embed it in a navigation controller. Great. For the name, I'll just simply call it training app, as generic as possible there. So training app, great. So control drag from our settings button over to our controller. Control drag from my settings button over to my table view controller and select show. Before we do anything, let's run the app and make sure it does segue correctly. So Command R, not on my phone, on the simulator. Command R. Click on the settings button and make sure it segues over to our table view controller. So if it segues over correctly, you should see a table view, correct? Yes? Excellent. Let's keep going here. So on our table view controller, click, let's open up the documents outline so it's easier for you to manage the table view controller. Click on the table view. Click on the table view and go to our attributes inspector. In the attributes inspector, currently, what's the content? What does it say? Dynamic prototypes, correct? So if you want to change it to static prototypes, which is very similar to the settings app I just showed us, we simply toggle from dynamic prototypes over to static cells. Okay? I'm sorry? Because we do not have an array of data. The cells we'll be creating is static, it does not change. We'll create it via storyboard, like we're dragging outlets over. On a cell, on a dynamic cell, you're not dragging, well, a prototype cell you do, but here we'll have maybe multiple cells of static content. It does not change. So click on static cells. By default, it gives us 3 cells. We could change the number of cells. We could add more cells. Here we have 1 section. I could change the number of sections as well. Do we see where the sections is? Do we see sections? So I could increase sections to 2. Do we see that? Right? So for example, if I go back to our app here. No, that's not dynamic sections. Keep in mind that is not dynamic sections. You cannot do this with Game of Thrones, if that's where you're going with that. right? Yeah, that's not, no. But good observation, but no, you would not be able to use that for Game of Thrones. All right, so let's go to settings. You see how it's sectioned out here? Those are the sections. In the settings app, the sections we just added, like if I have 2 sections, right now, how many sections do you see on screen? 4, right? 4. There's a profile with the photo, right? There's like the general, there's a password area, and then there's the maps, like all of the apps, right? So there's 4 sections there. All right, cool. So for now, we do not need 2 sections. So let's go back, click on your table view, and go back to 1. Go back to 1. If you want to change the number of rows, you go to section. Everybody? So if I want to change the number of sections, where do I go? Table view, right? If I want to change the number of rows, where do I go? Section. Awesome. So here we have 3 rows by default. Again, I could increase that number. I could decrease that number. So far, so good? Okay. So here we'll start off with 1. And let us go ahead and set that up. So we have a static cell. We have a table view controller. That's what we've seen so far. Any questions before we continue? Okay. So now we could go ahead and drag in the UI elements we want on that particular cell. 1 for now, yes. On that particular cell, I could drag in an image view, I could drag in a switch, I could drag in any UI element I want. In a dynamic cell, you don't have that ability, only if it's a prototype cell. But I cannot have multiple cells on that same table view, like that. So here, what I want to have is 2 labels. My first label, go ahead and get a label. I have a label here. That label will be called unit measurement. And I have a second label. Could just option drag, actually. We'll start off with miles here. Okay. So we have 2 labels. Let's set up the constraints for that. So our unit measurement label, let's click on Add New Constraints. And I'll make it 8 to the lead-in, 1 constraint. And I'll center it vertically. So I'll click on my Align constraint here, and I'll center it vertically in the container. So that's the constraint for our unit measurement. I'll go over to miles. I'll click on my Add New Constraints. I'll add 8 points to the trailing edge. That's 1 constraint. And I'll center it vertically. Okay? And I'll also constrain it to the unit measurement by 8. Sorry. Did I mess that up here? Eight points, add 1 constraint. What is happening? Unit measurement. Unit measurement, let's see. Let's double check our constraints here. So it might grow to be wider. So unit measurement, we have 2 constraints. We have lead-in, and that's it. And for our miles, we have trailing, and we have Y. That's fine for now. If we have any other issue, we'll come back to it. So we have 4 constraints, 2 constraints each on the unit measurement and the miles label. Okay? Remove the lead-in for now on the miles label. Okay, let's get to our assistant editor. Open up your assistant editor, and let's go ahead and control drag. Assistant editor. And we want to control drag. Actually, we don't have a class yet for this. And also section, that's fine. Let's go ahead and create a class for our table view. So we'll create a new file. Let's create a new file, Command N. And it's a CocoaTouch class. CocoaTouch class, subclass of UI table view controller, exactly. And we'll call it settings. Let me zoom in here. We'll call it settings view controller. UI table view controller. Make sure it's a subclass of UI table view controller. Okay? Not just view controller. What's that? What's that, Luba? Created a new file. It's a CocoaTouch class, subclass of UI table view controller. And the name is settings view controller. Click next and click create. Okay, let's see what we have here. Everything we have here, we just need to get it out actually. It comes with a bunch of boilerplate code. The table view controller, what does it have? It has a delegate already. It has a data source already, right? It comes with that out of the gate. It has a delegate and it has a data source already. With our basic view controller, our UI view controller, would have to add in a delegate and a data source. Everybody with me? Okay? But for now, we do not need any of those boilerplate methods, so let's just remove everything. Remove all that code here. Okay, get back your assistant editor. Go back to the assistant editor. Option click on your settings view controller. And let's go ahead and give this particular scene a class. So click on your scene for your table view controller. Click on the scene for the table view controller. Go to the identity inspector. Navigate over to the identity inspector. And for the class name, for your table view controller, we're calling it settings view controller. And make sure you press enter. Okay? Great. Perfect. Okay, next up. I'm sorry? Say that again. Oh, okay. So we added the class for the table view controller. It's called settings view controller. While I'm here, I'll just remove that section header. While I'm here, I'm just going to move that section header for now. That's section 1 here. Just move that. It's up to you if you want to keep. But if you want to change the header, that's where you go. You click on the section, and then you could change the header. You could change the header here. You could also give it a footer as well. Okay. Yulia, how you doing? Yulia? You good? Okay. Okay, the only thing we want to be able to access here is the miles label. So I will go ahead and control drag from the miles label here over to our settings view controller, and we'll call it unit measurement. Unit measurement. Call it unit measurement label, that's fine, and connect. Okay, great. Let us close out of the assistant editor, go back to our settings view controller. So when I select that cell, I want to toggle between miles and, for example, kilometers. When I click on the cell, I want to toggle between miles and kilometers. We have access to, I'm sorry? What did I name it? I named it unit, oh sorry, let me open that up. I call it unit label measurement, unit measurement label. unit measurement label. And let's make this bigger. All right. Can you see in the back? Okay. So we call it unit measurement label. When I click on the cell, I want to toggle between miles and kilometers. For example, if the person is from Europe or whatever, or just rather kilometers, you want to give them that option. So the objective again will be if I go to kilometers or miles and I kill the app, I come back, I still want it to persist that unit of measurement. Okay? All right. So we're in let me format my code here a little bit. We're in a table view controller. A table view controller has all the methods that we would normally use if we have like a UI view controller with a table view. If I want to have access to did select, for example, it has it already. I could just say did select. I don't have to say conform to anything. It has a data source and it has that delegate already. Everybody with me? It comes out of the box. It has all that functionality. So as the user clicks on a cell, we want to get access to it. Last week, we saw did select row at. So we'll use it again today. Last week, during one of our modules, we were able to see did select. When the user selects a cell, that function gets called, right? So let's go ahead and type in did select. Does everybody recall we used that method last week when we used different ways of segueing, right? So we selected it as opposed to like prepare for segue, right? We used did select. But here we want to know when the user selects a cell, we want to get information about it in order to know what cell got selected. Okay. So when the user selects a cell, we want to toggle between miles and kilometers. Already, we spoke about states, right? So we have two states there. One state, it's miles. The next state, it's kilometers. Go ahead. Say that again. What is supposed to populate?
It goes into the
Yeah.
So anytime we need to use table view, we should just use table view controller?
No. If you want to do a settings looking application, like you want your screen to look very similar to the settings page, you could use the table view controller. Anything else?
That's it, but it also can be the other one, right?
It could be the other, yes, it could be that as well. But I would advise you against that. I would say use your UI view controller with a table view. You have more flexibility there. You have more flexibility. I would advise against that.
For example, like can you add search bar?
You could put a search bar, but you have more flexibility. Like anything you're doing custom, already you have a view controller, you want it to be custom. It has a table view, it has a search bar, it has different elements. I would use the way we've been using. But if you want to have a settings page, for example, static cells, I would use the UI table view controller. Only for that particular instance there. Okay? Cool. Okay, so here, what do we want to do? So when the user selects a cell, we want to toggle between the miles or kilometers. So Luba, if your screen looks very similar to this one, use the table view controller. Anything else, use what we've been using for the last 3 units. Toggle between miles or kilometers. Great, that's what we want to do. So let's start off with some sort of enum. Anytime you want to do state, like you want to go between different states, think of an enumeration. Christian is shaking his head here.
I did it for the hangman.
Right, for his hangman, he did that particular design pattern. You have a question? Okay, so let's go ahead and create some enum here. So enum will be, we'll call it unit measurement. It has a case miles and it has a case kilometers. For now, we'll keep it in the view controller. If we need to remove it later, we'll remove it. But for now, it only works with this particular view controller, so we'll keep it here for now. Our enum will have a raw value on it of string with a more readable miles here and kilometers. We started off with miles on our view controller. So we'll have a variable here called current unit. And current unit, we assign it to unit measurement dot miles, for example. So that's the default unit we started off with. Our storyboard has miles. Our view controller, when it kicks off, that's the default. We'll have a did set here, code for user defaults. Because every time the user changes this particular value, we want to be able to add it or update that user default value. Okay. Great. So when I select a cell, for now we might have multiple cells, so let's capture that. Let's make it work with multiple cells. So we'll use a switch statement to figure out what cell got selected. So switch. What's a good value to switch on here? I want to switch on something to know what got selected. Index path, right? So index path, in that case, I would use, as Christian says, I'm going to switch on the index path.row. What type is this? This is int, right? Index path.row is the actual row index. So it starts off with index 0. So here I will simply say case 0. In case 0, we want to toggle label. We're going to toggle unit measurement label. And we don't, for default, we'll just break for now. Default. So we'll write a function that toggles the measurement. So right below our table view function here, we'll create a new function. We'll mark it private. Nobody needs to access it. So we'll call it toggle measurement or toggle unit measurement. Toggle unit measurement we'll call right here. And in the toggle unit measurement, that's where we'll have the logic for what happens to that label. Because every time I select that cell, I want to change the label. So I'll update my current unit. My current unit will get the value. So if the value is, so if current unit equal to unit measurement dot miles, for example. If it's miles, what I want to do is I want to switch it to kilometers, correct? Yes? If it's miles here, I want to switch it to kilometers. So unit measurement dot kilometers. Else, I want to switch it to miles. Right? Any questions about that line of code? So how do we read that line of code? First, we read what's happening with the condition here. I check the condition. Is the current unit equal to unit measurement miles? Is it currently equal to miles? If it is, I switch my current unit. My current unit here gets assigned kilometers, right? If it's kilometers, it gets assigned miles. Ternary operator, right? Back in unit 1 here. Any questions about that? Any questions? Yes?
That's how like they all read out, because I don't remember seeing that before, like current unit equals current unit, the beginning part.
We've done
That's
it.
just like I know we've seen ternary operators, but I'm saying is that just the setup of it? 'Cause
We could use parents here to make it a bit more readable for you. But in the if statement, so this is very similar to like an if else, right?
Yeah.
In the if block, it would be if this is true,
That's
then do this block of code after the question mark. If it's false, do the block of code after the colon. Cool? All right. Great. So that toggles our current unit. When our current unit gets assigned, what happens? When it gets assigned a new value, what happens?
The enum switches too.
The enum switches, but what happens? What do we want to happen? We have a did set here, right? So when it gets set, we want to update user defaults and we want to update the label as well. There's two things we want to do. So when we assign current unit, anytime current unit gets a new value, we have our did set on it. We want to go ahead and update our label and update user defaults. So here, update the unit measurement label and set new value, or update value in user defaults. Update, 1 second, Amini. Update value in user default. Okay, what's your question? We could have more cells. Right now we only have one cell. If we have multiple cells, the logic will be different. Okay? So, I mean, this question was, why are we switching on the index path.row? We could have multiple cells in that particular section, right? For now, we started with one, but we could have 2 or 3. And based on what index, we'll do a particular logic.
And this would be counted like by row in a section, or rows in
For now, we're assuming we have no sections.
this case, we have one section,
Yes, exactly.
and one row in that section, but I'm saying if there was multiple sections.
Then you would have to use the section to figure out what section it is. Right? Index path, we're switching on index path, that's row right now, but you'd have to switch on index path, that's section. Okay? Maybe you have an enum on the section.
So that would be like a massive switch statement.
You could break it out at this point. Right? You could have a function for it, or multiple helper functions. Okay, so let's keep going here. So update measurement label. So let's go ahead and update the measurement label. We have access to our measurement label. So unit measurement label dot text gets assigned. What does it get assigned? So unit measurement dot label dot text, it gets assigned one of those raw values. Either the raw value is miles or either it's kilometers. Okay? So current unit, if current unit, very similar to what we did earlier, if current unit equal to unit measurement dot current dot mile.
Call the raw value of the current unit.
Yes, actually, we could just do that, right? Because there's no reason why, because it's set already, right? So we could just do that directly. Good observation here. So I could simply say current unit dot raw value. So that would be either miles or kilometers. Right? Very good observation there, Minnie. So here we simply say raw value on the current unit because the current unit got set already. At this point, if we toggled, if it was miles, we got to kilometers. So if we here, it's kilometers. So simply just get me kilometers and change my text to kilometers. Let's go ahead and test that out and let's see what we have. So run the app. Go to settings and click on our cell, right? So as we toggle the cell, the label should change. Does everybody labels change? Right? But if now I go to kilometers, for example, if I want my workouts or whatever to be in kilometers, I kill the application. When I say kill the application, I press on the stop button. So if I click on the stop button, that's killing the application or relaunching the app, not relaunching, but stopping the app. So if I stop the app, we were on kilometers, correct? When I run the app again, I want it to still have kilometers. If I go to settings, it's miles, right? So at this point, our app does not persist data. Everybody with me, right? We've seen table view controller. That was not user defaults, but we just saw how to set up a settings page, for example. Actually, let us, when we get back there, please somebody remind me to change, when we go back to storyboard, remind me to change the group. Remind me to change the style to group. You could change this to group. Because right now we only have one section. There's no reason why we should have multiple empty rows. Okay? Actually, let's just do it right now. Let's go to storyboard. Go to storyboard and click on my table view. Click on the table view. And let's navigate over to, do we see style here? Yeah. We see style says plain, correct? So I could change my style to grouped. Okay? If I run the app again, go to settings, right? Right now there's no more empty cells. Okay? I changed the attributes on the table view from plain to grouped. Click on the table view. Click on the table view. You see style. And then change it from plain to grouped. Okay? Cool. Great. So let us work on user defaults. Say that again. The first one showed a list of empty rows. Okay? And group removes that. Right? Group is like a better style way to do your table view. It groups the sections together. If there's no sections in those rows, it would get rid of it. All right, so let's go ahead and do our user defaults. What does that look like? Looking at the notes from lecture, can anybody point me in the direction of how can I store this value? How can I store, for example, if I want to store miles or kilometers, how can I store that value in user defaults? Take a look at the lesson and walk me into that. Yes, sir?
First, we have to create a singleton for user defaults.
Okay, we could start off with that. So Matt says, instead of writing user default, right, not shared, user defaults.default, instead of writing that same code everywhere in my application, for example, if I have multiple view controllers and I want to access that same key, to avoid writing that same logic everywhere throughout my app, take a step back, you could create like a Singleton class that manages your user preferences, for example, right? So we'll do exactly that. We'll create a new file. We'll create a new file, Swift file. We'll create a new Swift file. For now, we'll call it user preferences. So user preferences or user settings, anything like that is fine here. User preference. Next, create. Okay. So here we have a class, we called it user preference. Right? And we're creating this wrapper that Matt brought up. We're creating a wrapper because the logic that we're about to write, we don't want to write it throughout every view controller we need access to. So yes, you use it in settings, but what if you want to use the kilometers in a different place? What are you going to do? You're not going to write the same logic again. You'll call this singleton user preference that's shared, get me the value. Okay? So Matt, walk me through creating a singleton here.
I'm still following along the material.
Okay. Anybody want to walk me through creating a singleton? We created one for network helper. A singleton, what is a singleton? Luba? What is a singleton? Luba? What makes a singleton unique as opposed to just a regular instance? Yes, sir.
It's an instance that you can only, once it's instantiated, it can never be instantiated again.
Everybody heard Matt? So what Matt is saying, I create this class, I only want one instance of it to exist. I create a singleton. And the big benefit of a singleton, or the way you make a singleton, is the public initializer, you make it private. So the minute I make that public initializer private, nobody cannot come and create a user preference, open parens, close parens. That will not work. That will fail. So a singleton is this one instance, same instance of that class that you use throughout your application, right? And to make it a true singleton, it needs to have a private initializer, right? Its initializer needs to be private. We've done it before. Please, next time I come back to that topic, know what a singleton is, right? There's pros and cons to singleton, right? A lot of people are like, yuck, I don't want to use singleton, right? Because it's this whole global state, and I've worked on applications where the singleton is like 1,000 lines of code. Why? Because it's easy, right? Anything that's easy, as developers, sometimes we tend to go there. Just dump it in that singleton, it's fine. We could access it anywhere in the application. So be very mindful of when you're using a singleton and why you're using that singleton. Okay? Here we're using it because we want to access it anywhere in the app. The use case of it is user preferences. That's it. It's not managing the entire application. It doesn't have extra data apart from just user settings data. It only houses user settings data. All right, so we said it needs to be private. Okay? So a singleton's initializer needs to be private. It ensures that only one instance of this class is used throughout the application. Nobody else could create a user preference, a new user preference instance. There's only one instance of user preference. And in order to achieve that, you start off with the initializer here, you make it private. Right? So marking this private initializer here enforces that no one could come in and create a user preference, for example, like this. This is no longer allowed. Okay? Any questions about singletons? Yes? Oh, we are not done. Go ahead.
I'm assuming the reason that we're not making it is because classes are, maybe reference types, right?
Classes are reference types.
Yeah, so like, why wouldn't this be a struct where it's not a reference type?
Then you'll be passing different copies. If you're passing different copies of it, you don't have a point to the exact same copy. In that case, everybody needs to have the same copy, the same reference, right? If everybody needs to have the same reference, you have a class, right? Anybody could change the reference of that one. If I add A here, everybody has the same A. But if it's a copy, everybody have different copies of it, okay? So we are not done with a singleton here. We need to be able to access the methods on it, right? So on that singleton, we'll create a static type. We'll call it let. We'll call it shared. And here you could call it shared. You could call it manager. You could call it default. Just keep very closely related with Apple's convention. Apple has, for example, default. They have shared. They have manager. Our network helper has what? Shared, right? Everybody? Okay, cool. So here we will have user preference dot shared is fine, and user preference here. So that's where we create the one and only instance. Where do we create the one and only instance? On line 19. Line 19 is where we create that instance of that particular class. Nowhere else in the application will it work. So that's the basic formula for a singleton. Initializer is private. You access methods, you access instance methods via this shared property. right? So any method we have, users will be able to access it via user preference .shared whatever function name we have. Okay, that's the only way it's accessible outside of this class. All right, what do we want to do here? We want to keep. What time did we start lecture? 10:15. Take a break here. Come back. All right, so let's take a break here, and then we'll come back and continue.